In the heart of a forgotten jungle, an ambitious archaeologist stumbles upon a hidden tomb and awakens a curse older than time itself. Now, haunted by ancient whispers and pursued by vengeful spirits, he must confront the darkness he unleashed before it consumes his soul and drags him into the shadows forever. The dense, humid air of the Peruvian jungle clung to Daniel Hay's skin like a second layer as he wiped the sweat from his brow. An accomplished archaeologist, Daniel had spent over a decade chasing ancient mysteries, but nothing had prepared him for this. The expedition had started as a routine exploration, charting the remnants of an ancient civilization lost to time. Yet, deep within the tangled vines and towering trees, his team stumbled upon a discovery that would change everything. A narrow cave mouth, nearly obscured by foliage, caught Daniel's eye. Its entrance appeared untouched for centuries, and the faint scent of earth and decay wafted out as they pried away the tangled roots. Excitement rippled through the team as they descended, their flashlights piercing the gloom to reveal murals etched on the stone walls, depictions of rituals, sacrifices, and guardians fiercely protecting something sacred. As they moved deeper, the passageway opened into a cavernous chamber where an intricately carved altar took center stage. Resting atop it was a small, obsidian amulet, its surface smooth and polished despite the dust-covered surroundings. Ancient script encircled it, warning of a curse that would consume anyone foolish enough to disturb it. Daniel felt a chill despite the sweltering air. His heart pounded as he carefully traced the carvings. One of his colleagues, a seasoned linguist named Marcus, deciphered a few words aloud. Eternal guard, restless souls, punishment upon the unworthy. A sense of unease settled over the group, but Daniel's curiosity outweighed his caution. The allure of the artifact was irresistible. Against Marcus's cautious advice, Daniel reached out, his fingers brushing the cool surface of the amulet. The chamber seemed to breathe, a shiver running through the walls as dust cascaded from the ceiling. He lifted it, turning it over in his hands, mesmerized by its craftsmanship. Suddenly, the temperature dropped, and an oppressive silence fell. A low, guttural whisper brushed against his ears, like wind moving through ancient graves. Just as quickly as it came, the sensation passed. Shaking off the eerie feeling, Daniel rationalized it as his imagination. The team, eager to catalog the find, packed up and made their way back through the jungle, carrying the amulet wrapped securely in cloth. But as they left the cave behind, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, something ancient, something angry. Back at camp, the team buzzed with excitement. Daniel cataloged the artifact, documenting every detail while ignoring the nagging fear tugging at the edges of his mind. That night, as he lay in his tent, sleep eluded him. Every rustle outside felt unnatural. Every flicker of light seemed to dance with intent. He finally succumbed to exhaustion, unaware that a shadow darker than night had settled at the edge of his camp, watching with unseen eyes. The next morning, one of the junior archaeologists, Mia, was found feverish and mumbling about shadows moving in the darkness. Marcus noted the strange cold permeating the camp, and a tension began to build as equipment inexplicably malfunctioned. Despite the ominous signs, Daniel pushed forward, his academic drive overpowering his growing apprehension. But deep down, he couldn't help but remember the warning: restless souls, punishment upon the unworthy. He dismissed it as superstition. Yet the amulet felt heavier in his pack, like it carried the weight of centuries of rage and betrayal. Unbeknownst to him, the curse had already awakened, and it would not rest until it claimed what it was owed. Returning to Boston brought a fleeting sense of relief. The familiar sights of brick buildings and bustling streets were a stark contrast to the oppressive jungle. Yet, the unease Daniel felt did not fade. It clung to him like the jungle's humidity, making his chest tight and his thoughts murky. He settled back into his routine, attempting to ignore the nagging feeling that something had followed him home. His apartment, usually a place of comfort, felt colder, emptier. At night, he swore he heard whispers slithering through the dark, and shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally across his walls. Sleep became a battle, his dreams plagued by figures in dark robes chanting in a language he didn't understand. One evening, while preparing his notes, Daniel's laptop screen flickered and went black. Frustrated, He tried to restart it when a sudden, loud crash from the hallway made him jump. Rushing out, he found nothing but a faint chill in the air. A black handprint marred his door, smudged and unnatural. As days passed, his paranoia grew. Daniel began seeing figures lurking at the edge of his vision, disappearing when he turned his head. Once, in his reflection, he noticed his own eyes staring back at him with an unnatural intensity, dark and hollow. Shaking it off as sleep deprivation, he immersed himself in work, trying to analyze the amulet's inscriptions. During a late-night research session, he found the carved warning translated in full. He who disturbs the eternal rest shall carry the curse of the restless, haunted by shadows until life fades and death claims him. Panic clawed at him as he realized the severity of his mistake. Determined to understand, he reached out to Professor Elena Ruiz, a historian specializing in ancient curses. On a video call, Daniel explained his find, showing her the amulet and recounting the strange occurrences. Elena's face grew pale as she listened, her voice trembling as she warned him. You've awakened something that should have remained buried. If the curse has attached itself to you, it will not relent. You must return the amulet and seek forgiveness from the spirit guardians. Otherwise, it will consume you. Before he could respond, a loud bang came from his living room. The lights flickered, and the room temperature plummeted. Daniel turned to see his shadow stretching toward him, long and menacing, as if trying to engulf him. Frozen in terror, he watched as the darkness seemed to pulse with malicious intent. He snapped his gaze back to the screen, but Elena was gone. The call had dropped. Alone and trembling, Daniel clutched the amulet, realizing with chilling certainty that the curse had crossed oceans to follow him. For the first time in his career, Daniel felt genuinely afraid. The warning from Professor Elena Ruiz echoed in his mind, her words cutting through the fog of his denial. Yet, as days passed, he found himself struggling to fully grasp the reality of his situation. A curse? In the modern world of science and reason? The idea seemed absurd, yet the evidence mounted around him. Shadows that moved without cause, cold whispers in the night, and the unshakable feeling that he was never truly alone. Desperate for clarity, Daniel pored over his field notes and photos from the excavation, searching for something he might have missed. He pulled up images of the tomb's walls, zooming in on the intricate carvings. The figures etched in stone depicted ancient priests performing blood rituals, their eyes hollow and accusing. One panel caught his attention, a depiction of a figure clutching the very amulet now sitting on his desk, their face twisted in terror as dark shapes closed in around them. The air in his apartment grew heavy, pressing down on him like the dense jungle canopy. The shadows in the corners seemed darker, their edges sharper. It felt as if the room itself was watching him, the walls leaning in, the floor creaking with unseen footsteps. The unsettling sensation of being hunted gnawed at his sanity, yet Daniel stubbornly resisted the urge to panic. Trying to cling to logic, he convinced himself that the stress of the expedition was merely catching up with him. He had seen strange things in his career, artifacts that defied explanation, tombs that seemed to breathe with their own life. But this felt different. Still, he clung to the familiar comfort of science, refusing to fully acknowledge the ancient rage he had disturbed. One evening, as he sat hunched over his laptop, a sudden chill swept through his apartment, making his skin prickle. The faint, metallic smell of blood filled his nostrils. Heart racing, he whipped around, expecting to see someone standing behind him. But there was only his reflection in the darkened window, eyes wide with fear. Then, to his horror, his reflection smiled, lips curling into a twisted, mocking grin. Daniel staggered back, knocking his chair over as he scrambled for his phone. He dialed Elena's number, his fingers shaking, the phone ringing endlessly without answer. Just as he was about to hang up, the line crackled, and her voice came through, faint and distorted, as if calling from a great distance. Daniel, you must listen. The amulet, it binds their souls, their rage. They will consume you. Return it, before it's too late. The line went dead. The silence that followed felt heavier than the dense jungle air, pressing down on his chest until he struggled to breathe. He slowly lowered the phone, his mind racing. Return it? To the jungle? It seemed impossible, yet the alternative, To continue being haunted by shadows and whispers felt like a death sentence. He glanced at the amulet, its dark surface gleaming in the dim light, and for a moment, he thought he saw something move within its polished depths, a pair of hollow, vengeful eyes staring back at him. That night, Daniel dreamed of the jungle. He found himself back in the tomb, the air thick with the stench of decay and ancient earth. Shadows clung to the walls like leeches, whispering his name. The amulet in his hand burned with a cold intensity, and as he turned, a figure emerged from the darkness, its eyes empty, its mouth twisted into a soundless scream. He woke drenched in sweat, his heart hammering in his chest, the darkness of his bedroom feeling thicker, heavier. Determined to break the cycle of fear, Daniel decided to clear his head with a late-night drive. He grabbed his car keys and stumbled out of his apartment, the hallway lights flickering as he passed. His breath fogged in the unusually cold air, and every shadow seemed to stretch and reach for him, their grasp just out of reach. As he drove through the empty streets, the city lights casting long, lonely shadows, Daniel's mind raced. Maybe Elena was right. Maybe he needed to return the amulet to put this nightmare behind him. But the thought of returning to the jungle, to the tomb where it all began, filled him with a dread he couldn't shake. Lost in thought, he nearly missed the dark figure that stepped into the road ahead. His reflexes kicked in, and he slammed the brakes, the car skidding wildly on the rain-slicked pavement. The figure vanished just as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only the echo of a whisper in his ears. Daniel. Heart racing, he pulled over, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The air in the car had turned frigid, his breath fogging up the windshield. His headlights flickered, and for a split second, he swore he saw his shadow in the passenger seat, twisted and warped, leaning toward him. When he finally found the courage to look, the seat was empty. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, lingered long after he pulled back onto the road, his hands trembling and his mind unraveling. As he pulled into his driveway, Daniel caught a glimpse of his reflection in the side mirror, his eyes hollow, his face pale, and something dark coiled behind him, grinning. The morning after the near-fatal car incident, Daniel awoke to the sound of his phone vibrating violently on the bedside table. The screen flashed with Elena's name. Heart still pounding from a night of broken sleep and shadows that whispered his name, he snatched up the phone. "Elena," he croaked, his throat dry, his voice rough with fear. "Daniel." Elena's voice came through, tight with urgency. "I've found something. You need to hear this." Without waiting for his response, she launched into a frantic explanation. She had stayed up all night combing through old texts and forgotten manuscripts from her university's archives, chasing the threads of the curse that now wrapped around Daniel like a noose. What she discovered sent a fresh wave of dread crashing over him. "I found a journal," she continued, her breath quick, words tumbling out in a rush. "It was written by one of the last survivors of the lost civilization you disturbed, a high priest who documented the final days of their kingdom. He wrote of a desperate ritual, a binding of their dead to the physical world to guard their secrets for eternity. The amulet you took, it's the key to that binding. It holds the souls of the betrayed, the slaughtered, the cursed." Daniel felt his stomach twist. He clutched the amulet hanging around his neck, its cold surface sending a sharp chill through his fingers. It felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of countless lost souls. "Elena, you're saying these spirits are trapped?" he stammered, pacing his cramped apartment, every shadow seeming to stretch toward him, hungry and watchful. "Yes," Elena replied, her voice trembling. "They are bound to that amulet. It was designed to keep them tethered to this world, to exact vengeance on those who disturb their rest. The journal describes them as the forsaken, souls twisted by betrayal, rage, and endless suffering." Daniel's heart raced as Elena continued, her words slicing through his last shreds of denial. "The journal says that those who awaken these spirits are marked, hunted by shadows and whispers until their souls break and they join the ranks of the cursed." A sharp, icy gust swept through his apartment, slamming his windows shut with a deafening crack. The lights flickered, casting his twisted, elongated shadow across the walls, a shadow that moved independently, its head slowly turning toward him. "Elena," he whispered, backing away from the dark shape that loomed over him. How do I stop this? Her voice crackled through the phone, distorted, almost drowned out by a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from the walls themselves. Return the amulet, she said, her voice breaking with fear. Return it to the tomb and beg for forgiveness, or they will consume you. The line went dead, leaving Daniel alone in the suffocating silence of his apartment. His shadow melted back into place, but the cold remained, seeping into his bones, wrapping around his heart. He dropped the phone, its clatter barely breaking the oppressive stillness. For the first time, he truly understood the depth of his mistake. The shadows were no longer just shadows. They were souls, restless, vengeful, and growing stronger with each passing day. Time became a twisted blur for Daniel. The shadows no longer just lingered at the edges of his vision. They closed in, whispering his name, their voices a maddening chorus that echoed through his thoughts, even in his dreams. He felt them at his back as he walked through crowded streets, saw them stretch across his walls in the dim light of his apartment, and sensed their cold breath on his neck when he dared close his eyes. He spent hours researching, desperate to find a way to sever the bond between him and the amulet without returning to the jungle. But every legend, every ancient text, pointed to a single, terrifying conclusion. The amulet had to be returned to its resting place, deep in the jungle's dark heart, or his soul would be lost. As the days passed, the curse grew bolder. His reflection twisted into hideous, grinning shapes. His shadow stretched and crawled up the walls, and objects in his apartment moved of their own accord. One morning, he awoke to find his windows painted with bloody handprints, his bedsheets shredded, and the walls carved with ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with life. Frantic, he reached out to Elena again, his voice trembling as he described the escalating horrors. She listened in stunned silence before whispering, "Daniel, it's worse than I thought. The journal mentions that once the curse fully takes hold, it becomes nearly impossible to break. The spirits feed on fear, on despair. The more you succumb, the stronger they grow." Daniel's mind raced, the walls around him seeming to close in, the shadows growing darker, more tangible. He knew what he had to do. With a shaky breath, he whispered into the phone, "I'm going back. I'm going to return the amulet." Elena hesitated, her voice strained. "It's not just about returning it. The journal said you must seek forgiveness. You must confront the spirits, show remorse, and survive their judgment." Daniel's blood ran cold at the thought. Confront the very spirits he had awakened? The very souls that had turned his life into a waking nightmare? But there was no other choice. If he wanted to reclaim his life, his sanity, and his soul, he had to face the darkness he had unleashed. As he hung up the phone, a low, guttural whisper drifted through his apartment, curling around him like smoke. "Return to us, Daniel. Join the Forsaken." His breath hitched, his pulse thundered in his ears, and the shadows around him shifted, their forms stretching toward him like the grasping hands of the dead. He packed his bags that night, each shadow that flickered in his peripheral vision a reminder that his time was running out. As Daniel prepared for his journey back to the jungle, the curse's grip tightened. Shadows no longer merely lurked at the edges of his vision. They invaded his life, spreading their dark influence to those around him. His brother, Michael, a construction foreman, narrowly escaped a horrific accident when the scaffolding he was standing on collapsed without warning. His best friend, James, a pediatrician, called one night, his voice trembling, describing how his young daughter had fallen into a sudden, inexplicable coma. Daniel felt the weight of his mistake crushing him. He knew, deep down, that these misfortunes weren't mere coincidence. The spirits were extending their reach, lashing out at anyone connected to him, punishing those he loved for his sins. Guilt twisted in his gut, sharpening the edges of his fear. Desperate, Daniel tried to distance himself, cutting off contact with his family and friends, hoping to shield them from the darkness that clung to him. He canceled lunch plans, ignored phone calls, and withdrew into his cramped apartment, where the walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of their own. But the shadows only grew bolder, creeping across his floors, whispering in languages long dead, scratching ancient symbols into his furniture. One night, as he packed his gear for the return trip to Peru, his phone buzzed violently. It was Michael. "Danny, man, What the hell is going on? Michael's voice was raw with panic. I keep seeing things, shadows that move when they shouldn't, whispers in the dark. It's like I'm losing my mind. Daniel's heart sank. He had hoped that by isolating himself, he could protect his brother, but the curse was spreading like a disease, reaching through him to touch those he held dear. Mike, Daniel's voice cracked, the guilt thick in his throat. Listen to me. You have to stay away from me, okay? Just don't come near me. Don't try to call me. It's the only way I can keep you safe. Safe? From what? Michael's voice cracked with fear and confusion. What the hell have you gotten yourself into? But before Daniel could answer, the line filled with a low, guttural growl, a sound that chilled his blood and made his bones ache. The connection crackled, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Daniel swore he heard his own voice echoing back to him, layered beneath the static, a twisted, mocking version of himself, whispering Michael's name. The call dropped. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on him, the shadows in his apartment twisting with malevolent glee. Breathing hard, Daniel stumbled to his knees, the amulet around his neck burning against his chest, its whispers growing louder, angrier. He could feel the spirits feeding on his fear, their rage seeping into his bones, their whispers growing louder with each passing day. He had to leave. Now, before the curse consumed everyone he cared about. The flight to Peru felt like a slow descent into madness. Every flicker of the cabin lights, every shadow cast by a passing passenger, seemed to pulse with dark intent. Daniel kept his head down, his fingers wrapped tightly around the amulet hidden beneath his shirt, its icy touch a constant reminder of his impending reckoning. As the plane touched down in Lima, the oppressive heat and thick air felt almost comforting compared to the unnatural chill that had seeped into his life back in Boston. He moved quickly through customs, his eyes constantly flicking to the shadows, his mind replaying the frantic phone call with Michael, the terrified whispers of his brother echoing in his ears. Elena met him at the airport, her face drawn and pale, dark circles shadowing her eyes. She gripped his arm tightly as they navigated the crowded terminal, her whisper urgent. Daniel, I've done more research, she said, her words coming in quick, breathless bursts. The journal, it talks about a final judgment, a trial by the spirits themselves. If you can survive it, if you can prove your remorse, they might release you. Might. Daniel's voice was hoarse, his throat dry despite the humid air. Elena's eyes darted to a shadow that flickered across the wall, her grip tightening on his arm. This isn't just about returning the amulet. You've awakened something ancient and vengeful. They won't let go easily. They traveled by small plane to the remote jungle outpost where their expedition had begun, the dense, green canopy stretching endlessly below them. As the plane descended, Daniel felt the shadows stir, the air around him growing colder despite the tropical heat. That night, as they made camp at the edge of the jungle, Daniel's dreams were consumed by violent, chaotic visions. He saw the ancient civilization as it once was, proud warriors, chanting priests, and the terrified screams of those sacrificed to appease dark, forgotten gods. He watched as their kingdom fell, their temples toppled, and their priests sealed themselves within the tomb to perform the binding ritual, trapping their own souls in eternal rage and despair. He awoke with a start, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps, his heart hammering in his chest. He stumbled out of his tent, the jungle around him alive with the sounds of unseen eyes watching, unseen mouths whispering his name. Elena emerged from her tent, her face pale in the moonlight. She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear. They know you're here, Daniel, she whispered, her voice trembling. They're waiting. Daniel clutched the amulet, its cold surface burning against his palm, and for the first time, he felt the full, crushing weight of his mistake. He was not just returning to confront the spirits. He was walking into his own judgment, a trial that could strip his very soul. The next morning, the jungle awoke around them, alive with the chatter of unseen creatures and the dense, wet heat that clung to their skin. Daniel's muscles ached from a night of restless sleep, his mind still haunted by the screams of the dead. He glanced at Elena as she packed their gear, her movements stiff, her eyes hollow with fear. She had seen the same visions, the same flashes of ancient terror that had invaded his mind. They moved quickly, cutting through the dense undergrowth with machetes, their breaths coming in short, nervous bursts as the jungle closed in around them. The shadows beneath the thick canopy felt different, darker, heavier, as if the spirits themselves were watching, whispering, waiting for their chance to strike. Hours into their trek, Daniel felt the amulet grow colder against his chest, its weight pulling at him like a lead anchor. The jungle air grew thick, cloying, every breath a struggle against the oppressive heat. He stumbled, catching himself on a twisted root, the sharp sting of a thorn cutting into his palm. Blood dripped onto the thick, wet earth, vanishing instantly into the hungry soil. Elena paused, turning to look at him, her eyes wide. Daniel, you need to stay focused. The closer we get, the stronger they'll become. They'll try to break you, don't let them. He nodded, swallowing hard, the metallic taste of fear sharp on his tongue. They pushed deeper into the jungle, the ancient trees towering over them like silent sentinels. The shadows lengthened, creeping closer, their whispers growing louder with each step. As they reached a steep incline, the ground beneath their feet shifted, the earth soft and treacherous. Daniel's boot slipped on a moss-covered rock, and he tumbled backward, the jungle spinning around him in a dizzying blur of green and black. He crashed into the underbrush, his body slamming into the gnarled roots of an ancient tree. The wind was knocked from his lungs, his head spinning as he struggled to his feet. Blood trickled down his forehead, stinging his eyes. He reached for his pack, only to freeze as a dark, hulking shape materialized in the shadows before him. It was one of them, a twisted, rotting figure, its hollow eyes locked on him, its jaw stretched into a silent scream. Its bony fingers twitched, reaching for him, the air around it shimmering with a cold, unnatural energy. Daniel stumbled backward, his heart hammering in his chest. He fumbled for the amulet, clutching it tightly, its icy touch burning against his skin. The figure hesitated, its empty eyes flicking to the amulet, its head tilting in recognition. Return what you stole. It hissed, its voice a guttural whisper that echoed through the trees, rattling the very leaves above them. Before he could respond, the figure melted back into the shadows, its twisted form dissolving into the dense undergrowth. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears, his breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. Elena appeared beside him, her eyes wide with terror. She grabbed his arm, pulling him to his feet, her grip like iron. They're getting stronger, she whispered, her voice shaking. We're running out of time. They continued forward, the shadows pressing in around them, the air growing colder, the whispers louder. The jungle itself seemed to shift and twist, the trees bending toward them, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal hands. They were close now, too close to turn back. As night fell, the jungle transformed into a twisted, living nightmare. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper, their whispers a constant, maddening drone that gnawed at the edges of Daniel's sanity. The fire they built for warmth and light felt pitifully small, its flickering flames casting long, dancing shadows that twisted and stretched into monstrous shapes. Elena sat across from him, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She clutched a small, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with her frantic scribblings from their journey, notes on the curse, the spirits, and the final judgment that awaited them. We're close, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. The tomb should be just a few hours' hike from here. If we can make it, if we can return the amulet and beg for forgiveness, we might still have a chance. Daniel nodded, his jaw clenched, his fists trembling. He could feel the amulet pulsing against his chest, its whispers merging with the voices in the darkness, their collective rage pressing down on him like a physical weight. As the night wore on, the shadows grew bolder. They flickered at the edges of the firelight, their twisted forms inching closer, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. Daniel felt his sanity fraying, his mind unraveling beneath the relentless assault. He clutched the amulet tighter, its cold surface the only solid thing in his increasingly distorted reality. Suddenly, a sharp, bone-chilling scream tore through the darkness, cutting through the jungle's constant drone of insects and rustling leaves. Daniel and Elena froze, their eyes locked, their breaths caught in their throats. The scream came again, closer this time, its pitch rising into a desperate, soul-rending wail that echoed through the trees, shaking the very ground beneath them. Daniel stumbled to his feet, his eyes darting to the shadows that closed in around their camp. Shapes twisted and writhed in the darkness, their hollow eyes glowing with unnatural light, their twisted limbs reaching for the fire. "Elena!" he shouted, his voice cracking with terror. "We have to move now." They grabbed their packs, stumbling through the dense underbrush, the shadows swarming behind them, their whispers a deafening roar that drowned out all other sound. The jungle closed in around them, the air growing colder, the ground shifting beneath their feet. As they crashed through the trees, Daniel felt the amulet grow heavier, its whispers growing louder, more desperate. It pulsed against his chest, its icy tendrils wrapping around his heart, squeezing tighter with each passing second. The spirits were closing in, their rage building, their whispers rising into a deafening chorus that shook the very earth beneath them. They had to reach the tomb before it was too late. The dense jungle seemed to bend around them, the shadows clinging to their every step, their whispers growing louder, more desperate, as if sensing the end was near. Daniel's heart raced, his breaths coming in short, panicked bursts as he hacked through the thick undergrowth, the amulet's icy weight pressing against his chest like a curse. Elena stumbled behind him, her face pale and streaked with sweat, her eyes wide with terror. They had been pushing forward for hours, their muscles aching, their lungs burning, the whispers never ceasing, their voices blending into a maddening, endless chant. Just as Daniel felt his legs would give out, the jungle abruptly parted, revealing a massive stone structure rising from the thick underbrush, the entrance to the tomb. The ancient stone doorway was covered in dense vines and twisted roots, the carvings on its surface weathered but still sharp, the symbols seeming to pulse with a dark, forgotten power. They hesitated at the threshold, the air around them growing colder, the jungle falling silent, as if the entire world held its breath. Daniel reached for the amulet, its surface icy and slick with sweat, his fingers trembling as he lifted it to the carvings. The ground beneath their feet shuddered, a deep, guttural rumble echoing from within the darkness of the tomb. The vines twisted, the stone walls groaned, and a figure emerged from the shadows, its form towering and twisted, its eyes hollow and glowing with a ghostly light. It was the Guardian. The figure stepped forward, its skeletal frame wrapped in tattered, ancient robes, its bony fingers outstretched, the air around it crackling with dark energy. Its hollow eyes locked onto the amulet, its jaw stretching open in a silent, rage-filled scream that seemed to vibrate through the very earth beneath them. Daniel staggered back, his heart thundering in his chest, his mind reeling with terror. Elena clutched his arm, her grip like iron, her eyes wide with panic. "It's the Guardian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's here to judge us." The Guardian stepped closer, its twisted form gliding across the ground without a sound, its empty eyes burning with ancient fury. It raised a skeletal hand, pointing directly at Daniel, its jaw snapping shut with a bone-chilling crack. The shadows around them surged, their whispers rising into a deafening roar, their twisted forms swirling around the Guardian, their hollow eyes fixed on Daniel, their rage seeping into his very bones. With a trembling hand, Daniel held the amulet out, his voice breaking as he shouted into the darkness, "I'm here to return it. I'm sorry. I didn't know." The Guardian paused, its head tilting to the side, its empty eyes narrowing, its skeletal fingers twitching. The shadows grew still, their whispers falling silent, the jungle around them frozen in anticipation. For a brief, terrifying moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the weight of ancient, unspeakable rage. Then, with a sudden, violent lunge, the Guardian reached for Daniel, its bony fingers wrapping around his outstretched hand, the amulet burning against his palm. The world around them shattered into darkness. Daniel felt himself falling, his body weightless, the air rushing past him in a freezing, suffocating whirl. Shadows twisted around him, their whispers rising into a deafening roar, their cold, skeletal hands reaching for his flesh, their hollow eyes burning with eternal rage. He hit the ground hard, the impact jarring every bone in his body, the breath ripped from his lungs. The darkness around him pulsed, alive with the tortured whispers of the Forsaken, their voices a maddening chorus that echoed through his mind, tearing at his sanity. He pushed himself to his knees, the ground beneath him cold and slick, the air thick with the metallic stench of blood and decay. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw them, the spirits, their twisted, skeletal forms stretching into the shadows, their hollow eyes fixed on him, their mouths twisted into silent screams. The Guardian loomed above him, its skeletal frame towering over the horde of twisted souls, its empty eyes burning with a cold, ancient fury. It reached for him, its bony fingers wrapping around his chest, its touch freezing his flesh, burning into his soul. Daniel screamed, the sound ripped from his throat, his mind splintering beneath the weight of the Guardian's rage. Images flashed before his eyes, the jungle, the tomb, the sacrificial altars stained with ancient blood, the priests chanting their dark incantations as their souls were bound to the amulet. He felt their pain, their betrayal, their rage, 1,000 voices screaming in his mind, their anger seeping into his bones, their hatred consuming his very soul. No, he choked, his body writhing in the Guardian's grip, his vision blurring as the shadows closed in around him. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't mean to disturb your rest. The Guardian paused, its head tilting, its hollow eyes narrowing, the shadows around them flickering with uncertainty. Daniel felt the amulet pulsing against his chest, its icy surface burning into his flesh, its whispers merging with the tortured voices of the Forsaken. With the last of his strength, he forced the amulet into the Guardian's grasp, his voice breaking as he whispered into the darkness, "Take it back. Take it and let me go." The Guardian froze, its empty eyes locked onto the amulet, its bony fingers trembling as they closed around the cursed artifact. The shadows around them shuddered, their whispers rising into a deafening roar, their twisted forms stretching toward the Guardian, their hollow eyes burning with desperate, vengeful hunger. The ground beneath them cracked, the air around them shattering into 1,000 screaming voices, the darkness consuming them both. Daniel felt himself falling again, the shadows tearing at his flesh, their whispers burning into his mind, their rage seeping into his bones. And then, silence. He hit the ground, the breath ripped from his lungs, his body battered and broken, his mind splintered, his soul on the edge of collapse. Slowly, he opened his eyes, the world around him coming into focus. The jungle, the tomb, the twisted, ancient trees swaying in the humid breeze, the shadows retreating into the dense underbrush. The amulet was gone, and for the first time in weeks, he felt truly alone. Daniel's body ached with every breath, his lungs burning, his muscles trembling as he forced himself to his feet. The jungle around him seemed different, the shadows less oppressive, the air lighter, the ancient trees swaying gently, as if whispering secrets to the wind. He stumbled forward, his vision blurred, his mind still reeling from the darkness that had consumed him moments before. Elena's voice cut through the fog in his mind, sharp and panicked. "Daniel, you're alive." He turned, his heart leaping at the sight of her, standing at the edge of the clearing, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and terror. She rushed to his side, her hands gripping his shoulders, her touch warm, grounding him in the reality of the moment. "I thought I lost you," she whispered, her breath coming in short, shaky bursts. "I saw the shadows take you. I thought you were gone." Daniel clutched her arms, his fingers digging into her skin, his mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. He glanced down at his chest, expecting to see the amulet still burning against his flesh, but it was gone. The weight that had clung to his soul for weeks had vanished, the whispers in his mind falling silent, the shadows retreating into the dense underbrush. "They took it," he choked, his voice hoarse, his throat raw. "The Guardian took it. I think it's over." Elena's eyes darted to the shadows, her body tense, her breath shallow. "No, Daniel. It's not over. Not yet." She pointed to the ancient stone doorway behind them, its twisted carvings pulsing with dark, forgotten energy. The air around it crackled, the shadows swirling like a living, breathing thing, their whispers rising into a deafening roar. As they watched, the ground beneath their feet shuddered, the trees around them bending and twisting as the jungle itself reacted to the ancient forces awakening within the tomb. The doorway pulsed, the symbols glowing with an unearthly light, the air thick with the stench of blood and decay. "They're angry," Elena whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "You gave it back, but you disturbed their rest. They won't let us leave." The ground cracked beneath them, the stone doorway splitting open with a thunderous crack, the shadows within surging forward, their hollow eyes burning with rage, their twisted, skeletal forms stretching toward them with desperate, grasping fingers. Daniel stumbled back, his heart hammering in his chest, his mind reeling as the darkness closed in around them, the whispers rising into a deafening, soul-crushing roar. He grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her back, their bodies crashing into the dense underbrush as the shadows surged past them, their twisted forms screeching in rage, their hollow eyes blazing with unquenchable fury. They crashed through the jungle, the shadows snapping at their heels, their twisted, skeletal hands reaching for their flesh, their hollow eyes burning with a rage that threatened to consume them both. They stumbled into a clearing, the air around them growing colder, the shadows retreating into the darkness, their whispers fading into the distance. Daniel collapsed to his knees, his chest heaving, his mind shattered, his soul broken. He looked at Elena, her face streaked with tears, her body trembling, her eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. "They're still here," he whispered, his voice breaking, his body trembling. "They're not done with us." Elena reached for him, her hands shaking, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. "We have to keep moving," she whispered, her eyes darting to the shadows that lingered at the edge of the clearing, their hollow eyes still watching, still waiting. "We have to find a way out." As they stumbled through the dense underbrush, the jungle around them seemed to close in, the shadows growing thicker, their whispers louder, more desperate. Daniel's body ached, his mind splintered, his soul hanging by a thread. The weight of his mistake, his arrogance, crushed him, every step a struggle against the darkness that clung to his very soul. Elena's hand tightened around his arm, her grip like iron, her breaths coming in short, panicked gasps as they crashed through the twisted, ancient trees, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers, their shadows flickering with dark, hungry intent. They burst into another clearing, the jungle falling silent, the air growing still, the shadows retreating into the dense underbrush. Before them stood a massive, ancient altar, its stone surface stained with the blood of countless sacrifices, its edges carved with twisted, forgotten symbols that pulsed with a dark, unearthly light. Daniel felt the amulet's absence keenly, its whispers still echoing in his mind, its icy tendrils still wrapped around his heart. He stumbled forward, his body trembling, his mind reeling, his soul teetering on the edge of collapse. Elena stepped beside him, her eyes locked on the altar, her breath catching in her throat. "This is it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This is where it all began." The ground beneath them shuddered, the trees around them bending and twisting as the jungle itself reacted to their presence, the shadows creeping closer, their hollow eyes fixed on the altar, their whispers rising into a deafening, soul-crushing roar. Daniel staggered to his knees, his hands reaching for the cold, unyielding stone of the altar, his breath coming in short, desperate gasps. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking, his body trembling. "I'm sorry for disturbing your rest. I'm sorry for my arrogance, my greed." The air around them grew colder, the shadows retreating, their whispers falling silent, the ancient trees swaying gently in the humid breeze. For a brief, terrifying moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, the jungle falling silent, the air growing still, the shadows retreating into the dense underbrush. Then, with a sudden, violent crack, the altar split in two, the ground beneath them shaking, the trees around them swaying, the shadows dissolving into the darkness, their hollow eyes fading into the distance. Daniel collapsed to the ground, his body broken, his mind shattered, his soul cleansed. The darkness was gone. They had survived. They had been forgiven. As the first light of dawn broke through the dense jungle canopy, Daniel and Elena stumbled into the warmth of the rising sun, their bodies battered, their minds shattered, but their souls finally free from the ancient darkness that had haunted them. The shadows that had clung to their every step, the whispers that had tormented their minds, the twisted spirits that had clawed at their souls, all had been banished, their rage silenced, their suffering ended. They paused at the edge of the jungle, their breaths coming in short, shaky gasps, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief. The dense, oppressive darkness that had surrounded them for so long gave way to the soft, golden light of a new day, the birds singing their morning songs, the trees swaying gently in the humid breeze. Daniel turned to Elena, his eyes meeting hers, their shared ordeal forging a bond that would never be broken, their souls forever intertwined by the horrors they had faced, the darkness they had conquered. "We made it," he whispered, his voice cracking, his heart swelling with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "We survived." Elena managed a weak, trembling smile, her eyes filling with tears. "We did," she whispered, her voice breaking, her body leaning into his, her fingers clutching his arm like a lifeline. "We made it." As they stumbled into the sunlight, leaving the twisted shadows of the jungle behind, the ancient spirits that had haunted them for so long fading into the darkness, they felt the weight of their ordeal lift, their souls cleansed, their hearts filled with the warmth of a new beginning. They had faced the darkness, confronted their fears, and emerged stronger, forever changed, forever bound by the ancient curse they had broken. And as they walked into the light, their shadows stretching behind them, their hearts swelling with the promise of a new dawn, they knew they had truly been forgiven. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling journey into the heart of darkness. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more epic, spine-chilling tales of courage, survival, and the unknown, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more unforgettable adventures, because the darkness always has more secrets to reveal. Until next time, keep your light burning bright and never stop exploring the unknown.